Why did Tony kill Ralph? On the surface, it looks like it was because Ralph insulted him. The insult is the straw that broke the camel's back, after being convinced that Ralph killed Pyomai. But I argue that Tony killed Ralph for beating Tracee to death. Her tragic death was the catalyst for Tony ending Ralph's life. Tony had a lot of pent-up anger, and maybe even trauma since Tracee's death. Remember when Tony looked at his daughter carrying a plate? This gave Tony a flashback of Tracee holding a tray of bread. Both she and his daughter are around the same age. This thought compels Tony to tell his daughter he loves her more than anything in the world. While at the hospital where Ralph's son, Justin, is being treated, Ralph gets in a heated argument with his ex-wife. Tony breaks it up and pins Ralph against the wall. The position they are in foreshadows what is to come later. When Tony suspects Ralph of burning the stable to collect the insurance money, he goes to Ralph's place to confront him. While in Ralph's kitchen, Tony hints that Ralph killed Pyomai, the horse, by having the stable burned down and collecting the insurance money. Ralph denies it and talks about his son Justin, but Tony doesn't veer from the topic. In a heated exchange, Tony says, "You cooked that fucking horse alive." Ralph vehemently denies it. He mocks Tony, calling him a vegetarian and saying that he eats beef and sausage by the carload. Tony punches him and Ralph fights back. Ralph sprays Raid in Tony's eyes and calls him a fat fuck and knees him in the groin. Tony eventually overpowers him, slamming his head against the floor while choking him. He does this until Ralph stops breathing. The dialogue in this scene reinforces the theory that Tony killed Ralph as a form of justice for Tracee. Notice the way Ralph relegates Pyomai to being just an animal. He refers to her as a fucking animal. Lines like, "The horse was no fucking good," and "It was a fucking horse." Pay attention to the line, "It was a fucking horse." That's similar to how he relegated Tracee, saying she was a whore, and all this over some dead whore, in past episodes. Horse and whore have a phonetic similarity. More dialogue reinforces this theory when Tony beats Ralph's head off the floor. He says things that could apply to Tracee and Pyomai. "She was a beautiful, innocent creature. What did she ever do to you?" Tony was openly hostile to Ralph for many episodes after the Tracee incident. Tony eventually made Ralph captain, and there was peace. However, Tony doesn't like Ralph, and only makes him captain because Ralph is best suited for the job. He even told Janice that the guy is no good. Tony notices one of Ralph's shoes at Janice's place and holds it up by the shoestring, like he's holding a disgusting dead rat. He looks at Janice with disappointment. Ralph Cifaretto, Janice? His tone is incredulous. However, Tony often puts his personal feelings aside and prioritizes business. He even admonishes his guys to put business first. While Polly talks about killing Ralph over the prank phone call to his mother, Tony tells him no. He's got a kid in the hospital, and look how he fucking earns, Tony says. In a scene where Ralph hands Tony a nice fat envelope, Tony suggests Ralph could have taken some time off because of Ralph's son Justin being in the hospital. It's also worth noting that the only 2 times we see Ralph cry are when Ralph gives his condolences to Tony after Olivia's passing, and when his son is in the hospital from an accident with an arrow. His sorrow seems genuine, and it shows that psychopathy can be tricky, as Ralph does have empathy, at least for his son and maybe even his mother. "I know how you feel," he tells Tony in Ralph's first scene. "We lost Mom last year." So, before the fire at the stable, we get the impression that Tony's opinion of Ralph is starting to change. Maybe he feels sorry for him and is relieved that this psychopath is showing empathy for once. That, combined with Ralph being a top earner, keeps Ralph a captain in Tony's family. But I digress. Ralph's capability for empathy is a topic for another video. The scenes of Pyomai's death and Tracee's death are quite similar. Think back to Tracee's lifeless body in the Bada Bing parking lot, surrounded by trash. Similarly, we see Pyomai's body dragged by a tractor, like garbage to be disposed of. Lines like, "Get a sheet and cover that up," were said over Tracee's body. Not cover her up, but cover that up, as if she were an object, a piece of garbage. We can assume they disposed of her in an inhumane way. Ralph said Tracee died because she fell during an argument they were having. When Tony confronts him over what they all know happened, Ralph says, "It's my fault she's a klutz." Tony punches him, but the fight ends because others are around to stop it. When Tony confronts Ralph over Pyamai, Ralph vehemently denies any involvement. Then he insults Tony by saying, "What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the carload." Then, like at the Bing, Tony punches him. Only this time, no one is around to stop the fight that ensues, and it ends in Ralph's death. Tracee's death was one of the times Tony showed empathy on the show. 20 years old, this girl, he says, as he looks at her lifeless body. That too, Polly said, emphasizing that Polly's primary concern was the fight Tony and Ralph had, not the dead young woman on the ground. So Tony was surrounded by guys who didn't care about Tracee. While Tony sits down with Johnny Sack about Ralph, Tony laments, "He bashed that poor girl's brains in." Johnny Sack tries to dismiss it with, "But she was a whore, Anthony." Silvio said something similar while giving counsel, that she was not related to Tony in marriage or blood, as if that earned Ralph an automatic pass. Silvio also reminded Tony that Ralph is a made guy. I think Pyamai entered the Soprano saga to serve as a symbol for Tracee the stripper. In the Tracee episode, Silvio refers to her as a thoroughbred. "'Cause a thoroughbred," he said. Thoroughbred is a term mainly used for horses, and history has proven that horses are subject to man's will. In the Western film genre, wild horses are broken in and made obedient to their human masters, and Tracee was a broken woman. Strippers like Tracee, prostitutes, and horses are there to serve men. Once a stripper reaches a certain age, she is of no more use. Pyamai stayed around because she won races and made money, but eventually, the horse was no fucking good with the colic all the time. As a general rule, the mob has no real sacrificial love for strippers or horses. They are purely a commodity. Tony had a painting done of him and Pyamai and asked to have, quote, "this deadbeat" cropped out. The painting arrives at the Bing after her death, and Tony gets emotional and orders the painting burned. We see him later crying over Pyamai at Dr. Melfi's office. "Oh, what are you doing?" Polly sees them burning the painting, puts out the fire, and keeps it for himself. Fancy piece like that with the frame? That's 25 G's minimum. But I think Tony only paid $6,500 for the work. Maybe the frame was extra, so who knows. Polly has turned Tony into a general, looking like Napoleon. When Tony finds out, he asks Polly if him and his whores laugh about it. Then Tony removes it from Polly's wall. All of this is to illustrate that Tony loved Pyamai and was very hurt by her death. Since Pyamai is a symbol of Tracee, I can infer that Tony was also hurt over her death. Tracee was only in one episode, 2 if you include a flashback scene, and 3 if you include the photo at the Bing in the episode where Ralph is whacked. Note the red dress on Tracee. It stands out from all the neutral, muted colors. It's as if the director wants us to pay attention to her or remind us of her significance in the story. A similar effect was done in Schindler's List, with the child in the red coat. The film is in black and white, with only the coat in red. Later in the film, we see the same red coat among a heap of dead bodies being carted away, letting the viewer know that, sadly, the child didn't make it. So I'm convinced that Tony killed Ralph as a form of justice for Tracee. If none of this is enough to convince you, I ask you to pay attention to the final scene in the episode. After spending all night disposing of Ralph's body with "I did dent" Chrissy, Tony looks at himself in the mirror, disheveled and looking like someone who just came off a bender. Photos of the girls who work at the Bada Bing are on the mirror. One image is of Tracee, and Tony looks at it. It's also a wholesome photo of her. She has her clothes on. We see a young girl smiling, a snapshot-style Polaroid. Her look contrasts with the images of the other strippers who are naked or nearly naked. It's as if Tony thinks, I finally avenged this girl. I wonder what Tony would have thought of Ralph if he found out that he was being Mommy's little whore to his sister Janice. I mean, after all, Janice was pimping him out, making like she was pimping him out, and vibrating his asshole. My name is Justin Tobin, and thank you for watching. If you are enjoying this content, please consider subscribing, because that will motivate me to keep making more content like this. So give this video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Take care, and rock on, everybody.